Hi everyone, my name is Guilherme Guichov. I am a Brazilian writer of medieval fantasy, and this is my class about pacing in writing. Pacing writing, it's all about pacing. This is going to be a theory class, not a practical one. I'm not sure if it's even possible to make a practical class in pacing. Probably is, I'm not sure how. And what do I mean when I say that it is all about pacing? Um, I'd say that from every aspect of writing, pacing is probably the most important for the final product. You can have a book you can have a book, for example, or a movie or anything like that. That has like a good plot, it has good characters, good writing, it has everything like okay, but its pacing, but if its pacing is pretty bad, I don't think the final product is going to be of a good quality. And on the other hand, I think that if you have a very mediocre book that, but it has a very good pacing, I think the final product is going to be okay. It's going to be at least readable. Like you can, the pacing allows you to read more easily. From among many other things, it makes so watching it or reading it is a much easier task. Okay, so we're talking about pacing. What is pacing in the realm of writing? It's not easy to define exactly what pacing is, if not impossible. But it's essentially the speed of the text, the speed in which things are happening. Not necessarily in terms of time, but instead in terms of how many things are happening. How fast are those things happening? For example, if you just like time skip 2 weeks of a movie, it doesn't mean that it has fast pacing. Uh, Usually, you will find fast pacing in action scenes. Why? Because everything that's happening happens for a very short amount of time, and then another thing's happening, or multiple things are happening at the same time. So there's a sword coming, and you block this attack, and then you counterattack, and stuff like that brings a lot of pacing. While a more like dramatic scene usually has a slower pace. So a scene in which you want to show the suffering of the characters. You want things to go slowly, so the viewer can see the impact of the emotions on the characters. Uh, an example right now from a very terrible joke. How many times can you subtract 10 from 100? Once. The next time you would be subtracting 10 from 90. Uh, the point here is that no one's going to tell a joke like this. Uh, how you usually find someone telling a joke is closer to this. How many times can you subtract 10 from 100? The answer, once. The next time you would be subtracting 10 from 90. In this case, for jokes specifically, you are trying to put emphasis on what is on like the punchline, for example. Or here, you are trying to put an emphasis to the answer to make uh, the target of your joke to be aware of how strange this answer seems. Uh, and even here, at the initial writing of the joke, you see that there's already like this dot that is showing a sense of pacing. It didn't need to be a dot here, it could be a comma, but instead it's a dot so that there's a longer pause between once and the rest of the joke. Uh, Now the Wikipedia definition about pacing in terms of writing. Uh, pace, Pacing is the speed at which a story is told, not necessarily the speed at which the story takes place. And what I told just now. The pace, it's an alternative form of writing pacing. The Wikipedia uses pace, but I've never seen it being used in any other place. Is determined by the length of the scenes. how fast the action moves, and how quickly the reader is provided with information. I'm not sure if this is like the perfect definition, but makes sense. Contributes to the whole idea of what pacing is. Also worth it pointing out that I couldn't find the origin of the term pacing. I searched for it a little bit in terms of writing. I'm pretty sure it comes from music or maybe from like physical activities. But for writing, I couldn't find anything about that. But I made like a very quick search. Examples of pacing. Two of the most simple ones, both for movies and for texts. Durations of black screens. Not all black screens have the same length, and they can be pretty quick or pretty long. Usually after like more emotional scenes, they are longer, so the reader has more time to absorb what was just shown. And eclipses in text. Not every eclipses is intended to change the pacing. Some of them are used for like some grammatical purpose, but many times the eclipses are used so the to change the pacing of the text. So now some bad examples of pacing. We have The Lone Ranger, a movie from 2013, and The Way of Kings from Brandon Sanderson, a book. I'm not saying that this book and this movie are bad. I'm just saying that they make the same mistake, which is they present multiple introductions at the beginning of the movie and of the book. We have like essentially four introductions from for the Lone Ranger and five introductions from the Way of Kings, in which we are presented to characters and then the characters just vanish from the story. And we are presented to new characters, they vanish, we're presented to new characters, they vanish, or like the plot just stops and starts again. We can find multiple examples of these two for both of these stories. Uh, so, what is pacing? What's the problem of having these multiple introductions? Is that the engagement, we could say, that the engagement of the viewer is just torn apart when we do this. The viewer gets engaged to the characters, gets engaged to the plot of these characters, and then we just remove the characters. And or we just start a new plot and stuff like that. It breaks the engagement. And this is the classical model of analyzing pacing, in which you have like a timeline of the event and then the engagement that the viewer should be having while watching the movie or reading the book. And I don't really agree with this model. I don't think that just saying like this arbitrary engagement that the viewer is having contributes to analyzing pacing, and I don't really even agree with like how the graph works. This like a line that begins at zero goes to max during the most important scene of the book during the finale, and then goes to zero. I don't think this is at all how engagement works. I'd say that when you get the book for the first time and start reading it, you are already engaged enough to put effort into reading the book or to go to the movies to watch the movie. So this emotion focus model, I think makes much more sense, and it's basically as if we picked every emotion in the world and put it in a graph. Like most emotions, which emotions we are going to analyze may differ. I'm not sure like which ones are important to pay attention to. So this graph is essentially which emotions it seems going to try to make the viewer feel. So a sad scene of someone dying, important main character dying, should make the viewer feel sadness and sorrow. So in that scene, like the sadness would be very high, for example, and the relation between these emotions, which between these emotions from one scene to another, is what's creating pacing. If the spacing is too fast, we could say that there are too many emotions trying to be uh, portrayed at small intervals. It becomes confusing. Yeah, it becomes confusing. It's never good to like for the viewer to feel confused about what's going on. And if it's too slow, the viewer just not feeling anything. He's feeling bored on. He's feeling like, oh, it's so tiring reading this. And that's essentially what this graph is trying to tell us. So, for example, a very good case for this motion focus model is an example that's not so common because it's a very obvious mistake, but it happens from time to time. Would be, for example, if in Avengers we have the famous scene, Mrs. Stark, I don't feel too good. I think that's the phrase. So we have like a scene that makes the viewer feel a lot of sorrow. And then if you just like added a quick black screen and pass to like a very joyful scene, for example, the scene in which all the Avengers are like drinking beer and having a nice chat, like the besides not making sense in this case because they are like the same characters, the pacing would be completely broken. We would have like a very sad negative scene followed by a very happy scene, and this would like break the pacing of the narrative. Okay, so everything has pacing. It's a little bit complicated, but I would say yes. Here I have two examples. One is like an artistic room. I'm not sure which term to use, but like these like rooms you can interact with or can like walk around, and the entire room is supposed to be like it's supposed to be artistic. And in the other case, in the other image, we have like a landscape. Any landscape doesn't need to be like an image. You can just like be present at the place, and then you look, oh wow, this is like art. This is like something wonderful. But like, what's the pacing of these things? And I'd argue that in this case, it's the viewer who is going to determine a pacing for both the artistic room and for the landscape. You can analyze them in multiple ways. You can pay a lot of attention to one thing, and view everything else pretty quickly. Or you can like take a look at the bigger picture and ignore the details. Or you can do the opposite. You can start taking a look at every single detail. And how you're going to analyze these works of art is going to determine the pacing that you are viewing them. We could then say that pacing is not universal. We just apply a presumed pacing for how the viewer is going to perceive the final product, be it a movie, a picture, or a book. So for example, if you're reading a book, the pacing you're going to be reading the story with is going to change depending of how much attention you are paying to the book. If you're taking breaks, are you reading it all in one go um, or in multiple months? Um, and it's the same for like a series, for example. Are you binge watching the series or watching one episode a day or one episode a week? And even for a movie, you can how you're going to watch the movie can influence the pacing you're going to perceive. For example, are you pausing the movie? Are you watching the entire trilogy in a row or like just one of the movies? And even the amount of attention, like if you go to the movies and you are watching a movie, are you paying 100% of your attention to the movie? Of course no, no one is. And this attention that you're giving also would also impact the pacing in which you are being presented the movie. So pacing is not something universal. We just apply a presumed pacing for an ideal reader or viewer of our movies, books, or pictures. So in conclusion, what is pacing? Pacing is like the sonority of the text, the reading. This for written text. For movies, it's a little bit harder to determine, but it's something that's always present in every phrase, every line, every arc transition. Uh, it's always present. It's possibly the most important thing in the entire book or movie, and something that you really need to pay attention to not make mistakes, like adding scenes that don't make sense in the sequence they're shown, or not to add multiple introductions, know how to use correctly the black screens and the eclipses. And that's all for today. Thank you for listening to this presentation. Any doubts, you can comment or send me an email and I will answer them. Thank you so much.